Thank you, Aruni, for joining with us today. I welcome everyone to the last session of this year's Writers International Festival. And this is the last session, so we will try our best to end it with a bang and not a whimper. So to Aruni, to begin with, let's begin at the beginning. How would you talk about your writing process? You know, when did you start writing? What was it that you really started writing with? Okay.
I started writing probably when I was around 9 years age, and I used to write short stories. So it was never really a decision that would become a writer. I was writing because I just enjoyed writing stories and making up stuff. I think one of the reasons I wrote because my late mother, was a novelist, and she wrote two novels in Assamese, quite a bit of short stories, non-fiction books, and she was part of the Assamese Women Writers, Assam Women Writers Association. It's a very integrate network of women writers in almost every district, every city, who support women writers and work for women writers. So she was part of the Women Writers Association. I used to go and meet them, the writers, and so I think I grew up valuing that writing is a really important thing. It's a very serious mode of expression. So I started writing then, but when I was in college, I started taking it more seriously because I realized that people say that I really enjoyed it. For me, it is less enjoyment. Of course, it is enjoyment. I choose to actually write. Then I would go on, watch a movie, or play football, or do other things.
Hmm.
I really curate my time around, or I kind of sort of work my time around my writing schedule always, because it gave me so much satisfaction. And I eventually, by the time I was a new adult, let's say, to use a literary term, literary marketing term, new adult.
Yeah.
I I realized that this is the only way I actually make sense of the world. And if I was perplexed, if I was happy, if I was sad, if I was confused, if I was angry, I realized that the only thing I chose to do was read or write. So that's how actually I would say my writing journey started. There isn't any writing process. I think there's a lot of deleting and a lot of rewriting. Um, if you really ask me about specifics, if when I write a novel, I really plan it out as much as possible. Um, when I write a poem or a short story or a novel, I usually know the ending before I start writing. So maybe that's my process. But I think my process is as boring as like as any other writer's process, which is to fight with an empty computer screen, and then once you finish the draft, you revise it or you throw it away. For example, I wrote an entire novel in November because I wanted to be part of the National Novel Writing Month, and I realized that it's not going to work as a novel. So it was about 36,000 words, and I deleted it, and I'm going to write it again. But that's the process.
But the story is already in your head, as you said, so you know the ending very well.
Yes, that's right.
Uh,
Yeah.
so you would say that it works. This principle kind of works with all three of your, all of the genres that you're working with. I mean, you're working with novellas, novels, short stories, poetry. Does it always do that to
I
all?
always see the ending. Yeah, I see the ending. I think the ending is like a destination. I don't know the way, but I don't have a map. But I need to know. I know that where I'm going. So I usually have it very clear in my head what is the ending, so that I know where I need to push my characters to. So that I know, even if the road is foggy and the headlights are not showing enough light, I should keep driving and be careful and reach the point of the, and because I know the destination. When I know the destination, I really do know that this is where I need to end. But let me explain this with a more simpler example. For example, my laptop is the graveyard of many unfinished, unwritten, or half-written novel, short stories, poetry, or novellas. And one of the reasons I abandoned them because the question that I was asking, um, I got the answers much earlier. I write because I have a very probing and a very strong curiosity about questions, about some questions that I want to ask about a people or a set of people or one character during a specific political and historical time. Once I know the answer, I lose the inspiration and I don't want to write it, because for me, writing is a quest for these answers. So, for example, in my first novel, The House of the Thousand Stories, which was set against extrajudicial killings in Assam, my question was not to write who done it, who killed whom. My question was, what does it really mean to live under violence? What does it really? What would my characters do if I put them under this very serious pressure cooker like situation? What would they behave like? How would they behave like? What would they do? What kind of choices they would make? Will they still continue to live? Will they still continue to mourn? Will they still continue to mourn and live at the same time? I did not know, as a 24-year-old writing the novel, I had no answers to those questions. So I wrote the novel and I did not have those answers until I wrote the last line. So for me, if I'm able to find that answer, the novel or the short story or the poem becomes less interesting to me, and I stop writing.
So as you said that there are questions that you want your characters to kind of find and look at, but there are in your writing characters who have multiple times come across. I'm reminded of Horokanto Bez and Mike and Nilakshi. So what is it that why are you coming to these characters? Do they have multiple questions and multiple lives in your writing?
That's a great question. Yes, actually, Horakanta Bej, for example, who is the main character, who is one of the main characters in his father's disease, the protagonist's father. But
Yeah.
Horakanta Bej actually appears in a novella also
Yes.
that
Yes.
I
Yes.
wrote in Assamese, and Horakanta Bej also appears in a very long short story in the same collection called For the Greater Common Good. And I think he will appear in many more rights works I will write. I think one of the reasons is that I have multiple questions about these characters. I didn't really know what would Anil do at that moment, when he realizes that somebody tried to kill him and his lover. And I think I wanted to go there, but to go there imaginatively, I can't sit and imagine. For me, I have to build that situation. So I wrote until the ending. But if I had known in the middle what would Anil do, I would not have written, and nobody would have read that story. But I didn't know until that moment when I reach what would Anil do, because when I'm reaching that moment, I am Anil, and I am viscerally feeling what Anil is feeling. So that moment, when I tap into Anil's consciousness, wherever it is, when Anil will tell me that this is what I want to do, that's when my answers are met. And at that point of time, it's too late for me to leave the story. I have to do justice to Anil's story and finish it and write the last line, which is the smell of burnt human flesh, the smell
Yeah.
of burnt human flesh.
Thank you, Aruni. Just to make a diversion, our principal I think has joined, Professor Swati Pal. Professor Pal, are you there?
Yes, I'm there, but please carry on. I'm just a member of the audience. Please carry on. Don't
Okay.
interrupt them.
Well, thank you so much for joining. It's a pleasure to virtually meet Professor Bal.
Yes, I will switch on my video at the end and actually meet you face to face. But please carry on.
Sure. Thank you, Professor. Okay, Aruni, to kind of go back, the other question which I really wanted to talk about is that you talk about the idea of people living under violence and making, uh, if one can really make sense out of that in whichever way. And I was thinking that, and you've talked about your mother's work and the women writers who have, and in a certain sense, writing in Assamese, a lot of Assamese writers have written um, so much about the 90s and the early 2000s, and the kind of the very very excruciating times that we've lived in. So what do you think has been the way Assamese writers and Assamese literature has kind of dealt with this idea of living and writing under violence?
I have to say that I don't think a lot has been written about the violent period in Assam's history. Um, but I do think there's a sizable number of works that have been written, and a few of them are very memorable, very strong. And I think I don't want to list them because I have to work from memory, but I think that a lot of these writers really talk about the plight of the common people. Um, under violence, apply to the common people, what it really means to live under violence, and the daily struggle when actually there is a long Assam ban. For example, what will happen if there's a 72-hour Assam ban? What will happen to the daily wage earners, right? What would happen to the people who actually need to go to the fields every day? So those things these writers have explored. Some writers have explored this from a gendered point of view, and wrote about the plight of women. I think women pay the highest cost, children pay the highest cost of violence. So they have written very sensitively, very beautifully about this. But there is something that I find in Assamese writing which used to bother me is a um, mutedness towards actually naming who is responsible for the violence sometimes. And I think I used to judge Assamese writers when I was an undergraduate for not mentioning that, because I was schooled by Toni Morrison and Nadine Gordimer. Those are the writers who I was reading when I was growing up in college, post college, during my graduate studies in the United States. So they were writing exactly, by making specific references to history. But I don't think a lot of Assamese writers, read that. But I realize now actually it is so much more unsafe to write with very specific information in that space, where in a language that will be read by almost everybody in the state, including the people or the historical figures who are named. So it's very dangerous and not a safe space. I think Assamese writers are responding to it in a far more imaginative way. There's a lot of guilt. I think a lot of it is liberal guilt also, and I feel that liberal guilt is useless because it only leads to more guilt and more apology instead of actual action. But I think we all need all of that to come together as a community and address these things. Um, I think Orpa Patangia Kolita, who has written quite a few short stories and novellas, which are really lovely. I like her work very much. Um,
Lani, in
Indira
fact.
Goswami, yeah, Indira Goswami has written short stories such as Journey, and she did want to write a novel set against this period, but eventually she was not able to do that. There is a book by Dilip Bora called Kolijar Eye. I think it was a pretty well done, very interesting book. Yeah, so these are some of the works that are coming to mind.
Okay, and how would you talk about contemporary Assamese writing? Considering the way that we have seen the last events in Assam, especially towards from 2019 onwards, after the change in the citizenship laws, have
Actually, it's too early for fiction and poetry writers to actually respond to these things. I think fiction and poetry work like distilled water. It really needs some time to settle down. But I can see a lot of op-eds. I can see a lot of angry Facebook posts. I can see a lot of online magazines publishing op-eds. A lot of the work that has been published are nonfiction about this period of time. And I don't think people have the distance to make sense of it. A lot of them have an urgency. So you won't find direct references to the Citizenship Amendment Act, but you will find definitely people, a lot of Assamese writers have written op-eds, nonfiction. Even writers who never used to write op-eds have written, against it. But one thing we must remember that people have been protesting this law for a very long time. It's just that the rest of India woke up to it much later. And so by the time the actual act was passed, a lot of steam had been sort of let off in Assam already, and
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Aruni, to move on to how would you talk about, your writing in English, and the way you start writing, let's say when you write in Assamese. How would you, uh,
I
look
think
at
I'm a
that?
bilingual writer, you know. I think this question 50 years ago or 70 years ago would not be strange. I don't think Tagore would have been surprised by this. I think Tagore would have been very surprised by this question. I think Gandhi would have been very surprised by this question. I think after independence, bilingualism started waning away, you know, and there was a massive decline of the bilingual intellectual in India, and a very elite class who only knew English but couldn't read what was being written in the vast sections of the languages in India, which we now call Bhasha, were actually representing India, this shaping the discourse of India. And we have seen what kind of problems it has given rise to. One of the big problems is, of course, the Indian English writer and who the Indian English writer writes from. So I feel that I'm a bilingual writer. I wrote all the time in two languages. But for a very long time, I did not publish in English until, say, I think 2010 or 2009. I did not publish in English. 2008, 2009, I did not publish in English. I can't really recall when my first English writing came out in a major place. But in Assamese, I have been writing for a long time. I wrote a column for a whole year in Amara Home newspaper, which is one of the largest dailies in
Yeah.
Assam. I wrote short stories, essays, reviews, and I think I gained my people came to know my work through Assamese writing. So that is why I find it really heartening that a lot of people who haven't read really English writing before, but have only read Assamese so far, pick up my work and read. You know, it's sometimes my stories or my novel in English is their first entry into English reading outside the textbook. So, and writing in two languages is not a problem for me. I think bilingualism, multilingualism, or living in translation, I think is the Indian experience. I think to not have that experience is, I think, is strange. And I think I can say that because I come from a very humble middle class family where my parents grew up in poverty. They don't speak English. They never spoke English. You know, my mother went to school hungry, and my father used to work in the fields, and he didn't even have an application to send to All India Radio. He didn't have 75 paisa to send to All in the Radio and fill up an application, which he borrowed from somebody in the early 70s. And I think not coming from an elite class to easily just go to any place to study, you know, expose me to the realities of Assam or India or the rural space in a much more intimate way. And I think this has really sort of enrich my experience and my foundation as a writer. So for me, bilingualism is very default, very, very default.
Okay. So, and that sort of brings me to your work in translation. You've worked so much, and have you ever translated your own work, as in translated your work from English to Assamese and from Assamese to English?
Yes, I have, and I'm a terrible translator of my own work. I should be jailed if I translate my own work. I really mean it. I have translated Minnesota Nice, and I made sure that no copies of that are available anywhere in the world. Uh,
Did you
I
do
have
that?
I did that. And I also translated the first chapter of House of the Thousand Stories, and I also made sure that all those copies are burnt. So in this case, I really do support burning of books when my translations are appearing in print. So I decided, and I think that's because I work so much by chasing the voice of the narrator. I work so much by chasing. It's almost like taking a dictation. You know, Asha Devi used to say, "I'm Ma Saraswati's stenographer." I think
Yeah.
I'm a stenographer of my characters. So if once they tell the story, they don't come back.
Yeah.
I shouldn't try to translate them.
So, how does it work when you're translating, somebody? else's work? I mean, how do you kind of work with, finding a voice that you are translating and writing, and with the authorial voice itself that is there?
It's a challenging work. You know the work as intimately as possible, the nooks and corners of the work. And also there is you do it with so much respect and love, that you cannot be cavalier like your with your own. Like I can be cavalier with my own translation. I could say, all right, it's my translation of my work. And I think that was why it didn't work. But I think you do it with so much seriousness, so much love, so much respect. And I also work only with authors who I have a very strong working relationship with. I don't work on contract. I don't do because it becomes homework, and I don't like homework. I never liked homework, so I don't do a contracted job where I'm paid to be a translator. So far, nobody has ever paid me for my translation work because I don't take payments. So first thing is that I have to really admire the work. And the second thing is that I should be able to have endless arguments with the author on what will be good for the English texts, which means that I really have to have a very strong friendship, intellectual friendship, personal friendship with the author after the fact that I admire their work. So it's a very difficult combination to meet, and I'm glad because actually I don't think I'm a professional translator. I think I do it because I really feel angry that, oh my God, how the hell this author is not
Yeah.
known widely, but I often find translators for other authors. When Assamese authors come and say, "Would you connect me with somebody?" I always connect them. But I don't think I'm a translator. I'm not a professional translator. I do it because as a sense of duty, as And when I did Indira Goswami's work, I did it because she asked me to do it, and I wouldn't say no to her.
Yeah, and that was what I was getting at. That, from your words, it seemed you had a very good relationship with, Mauni Raisum.
Yes.
And then, you've worked also with Anuradha Pujari Sharma's novel, and looking at from Indira Raisum's novel, The Bronze Sword of Thengpakri Tehsildar, and Anuradha Pujari Sharma's novel is they're two very, very different novels. So how do you choose? Because as you said, you choose the novels yourself.
Yeah, I actually love Hridoyak Biggapan, which is a novel that I just finished translating and I'm revising of Anuradha Pujari. Hridoyak Biggapan roughly translates as "My heart is a commercial," but the title actually is saying that my heart is not a commercial. So, but in Assamese Bengali we can say it's an ironic title. Anyway, I just loved the book, and one day I told her that you are not going to let anybody translate this book. That was almost like 5-6 years ago, and I still haven't sort of polished the translation and made it available for the market. But I did it because I really liked the book. I have read the book so many times. I feel that the characters are someone I know. So it was purely out of love for the book. I read it actually when I was in class 8 or 9. Then I read it, and every time I have become happy or depressed, there's been a moment I had 3 hours. I would reread the book. So one day I met her and said, I really want to translate the book. And by this time, I had been writing for the magazines she edits for quite a long time. So we have our own discussion about editorial issues, like what should go in, what could be the headline. So we already had a working relationship, and she's obviously much senior, but she always respected what I had to say. And now there is WhatsApp, so we can always send each other irate voice emails and voice messages, and to the extent that sometimes she says, if you want, you can change the ending of the story. She trusts me with that. I won't do that.
Wow.
Yeah,
Wow.
because I would say that you never said these things that are implied, but I think in the English translation you should imply. So give me those things that should be there so that this certain aspect becomes explicit. And then she would say, you point out the spaces I need to do that, and I would do that, and she would send me back.
So I was wondering, like, could you do us a small reading from one of your translations to give us a kind of idea of how you are working with it?
Okay, I'm going to read from let me. I didn't know that I would be reading a translation, but I have it all Obviously, everything exists in a laptop these days. So
Yeah.
give me a couple of seconds. I'm going to
Yeah.
be able
Sure.
to
Sure. Sure.
find that. I'm going to read from the translation actually of a different novel. This novel is a feminist autofictional work, and it is set in the city of Golaghat of 1960s and 70s in Assam. And this novel is written by Dipti Datta Das, who was my mother. And but I'm transiting her work. And my mother grew up in really absolute abject poverty. And this is a feminist autofictional work of what it means, what it meant to be a woman in the 1960s in Assam, in small town Assam. So I think anybody interested in post-colonial feminism, third world feminism, would find this book very, very interesting. Just give me 1 second, and I'll be able to find it. Uh,
Sure. Thank you so much, Aruni.
yes, yes. Okay, so I guess this is the right file. Yes, okay. Um, I'm going to read from the opening chapter, and I'm going to read from the opening chapter. The novel is called June Beli Tora Aru Annanno, and I have roughly translated, it as the sun, the moon, the star, and the others. Um, so this story is called is actually named is actually is an autofiction novel, as I said, narrated in first person, set in the city of Golaghat, Assam. The novel follows the life of a young girl called Tora Datta. So it's actually a Bildungs Roma in the 70s and early 80s, born in abject poverty. Tora uses ladder of free public education for social mobility and to earn dignity for herself. So she goes to school starving very often, with an ailing mother at home, but she's determined to win scholarships that will fund her educational aspirations. For there is no other way for her to kind of continue studying or support her widowed mother. So when she wins a scholarship to study at a university, she fights with her immediate and extended family to stake her right over education. And so it's really anybody who is interested about this period and about Tora's very dramatic life, I think would find this novel very interesting. Um, I'm just going to read from the opening pages. Okay. Chapter 1. It had rained all night. The swishing winds, rim-jim sounds of the rain, recurring thunders, and the night had created a scary atmosphere. Though deep sleep had crowded my eyes, I woke up, startled many times. Ma was sleeping beside me, was moaning in pain all night. Her chronic acidity problem was troubling her once again. Ma's moans and the rain and the wind's moans had merged. We rarely sleep during rainy nights. You never know when the hut would crumble on top of us. Its roof has several perforations in many different places from where rainwater dripped nonstop. Ma's moans pained me. Different corners of my heart were flapping like the wings of a helpless duck. The rain stopped only towards the wee hours. The sound of wind was also going away. Sleep descended to Ma's eyes. Maybe she was feeling a little better. I leave the bed stiltily, as I'm an early riser. I feel weak, maybe because I haven't eaten anything from last night, nor have I slept. Ma's acidity is troubling her because of the same reason. But what else can we do? Badr Ali's shop would not give us ration and credit anymore. Hence, there is no other way but to remain hungry. We owe him money for previous purchases. Yesterday, I had boiled around half a kg of rice, measuring with the old coconut oil tin. 4 people. How could that much be sufficient for all? There were no vegetables too. I went to the backyards and found the black yams stems swaying in the wind. which I plucked, cleaned, and made a curry with pepper and chilies. Too hot, but black yam stems couldn't be eaten without chilies and pepper. It left the insides of your mouth and neck itching. Sometimes we had to fill up our tummies. Somehow we had filled up our tummies yesterday. But I asked Ma not to eat that curry, but have only the rice. But she didn't listen. She fell sick just after that. Even my stomach was burning for a long time. I felt thirsty again and again. I drank glasses after glasses of water. The morning sunlight has flooded the house, and everything is bright. It is difficult for me to refrain from sitting at the table with the textbooks in front of me, though I want to study desperately. Ma is sleeping. Let her sleep. There is so much work left in the kitchen. I lit the fire in the hearth with a few wood logs, put the kettle with water on it, salted tea liquor. I opened each and every container in the kitchen. Who knows, I would find something somewhere to eat. No, there is nothing. I find some powdered rice in a different container, which I boil with hot water and leave for Ma. Both my elder brothers have woken up, and I serve them tea. Jun Kokai drinks the tea and walks out in long strides. He has a lot of work. The sponge gourd plant has crept up on the peach tree in front of the courtyard. It is bearing long green fruits. I asked my elder brother Beli Kokai to get a few, though they are not tender any longer, no tasty enough to eat. Most of them are forming strong fibers inside. Yesterday, I tried to bring those gourds down with Ma with a long stick, but we can't since they're high up on the thorny tree. I must go to school today by any means. I didn't even go yesterday. I think about school while I chop the gourds, place them on the iron pan, and boil them with salt and turmeric powder. The lovely smell of gourds wafts in the air, just like the smell of jasmine rice. I look for oil. There is not a drop. There is no rice at home as well. I would have to go to Border Ali's shop today to get things on credit. I can't ask Belly Kokai to get something on credit. He'd grumble. He has always been too shy, but didn't mind going to the market and bringing things if given money. I think I would stop here. Thank you so much for listening patiently.
Thank, thank you so much. Thank you. It's wonderful. Um, I'm just taking it in. Um, One question that I really wanted to ask Aruni is that many of your writers, many of your characters, sorry, I mean, many of your characters are writers, teachers, you know, and they do go to attend conferences, and there is a lot of representation in your work of the kind of cultural um, alienation that people from Assam face. Uh, let's say both in places like a literary conference in Delhi or a one in Minnesota. So how is it that you know how do we how do you also itself also is it autobiographical? That's one thing that I wanted to ask. And second thing is that how do you explain it? I mean, in one place I do understand that Americans say it's cultural, and there's so much strangeness that one notices. So how is it? I mean, what were your experience, and how is it? How do you feel about it?
Well, my experiences have been varied, so definitely in that sense, it's very autobiographical. I did live with a roommate who, who was strange. He thought that I wouldn't be able to use the stove. He asked me if there are computers in India. How did I even apply? And he confided in me that his relatives, I think it was his grandparents, were for the first time living next to a black family, and he confided that in me with a whisper, as if that was something that he thought we both were part of a major secret, a scandalous secret. Or I don't know what he was thinking. He just thought, I just wanted to say that my grandparents are living for the first time with a black family next door. And for me, growing up in India, people from all religions are with you. If you especially grew up in a campus like All India Radio campus in Guwahati, people, all religions, the whole country is there. It's like the united colors of India in a central government institution campus like that. So for me, difference was default. Uh, so I think I use a lot of autobiographical elements in this. But at the same time, if I wrote autobiographical fiction, it would be very like cranky and confrontational. So I have to create someone, a flawed character like, Himjoti, because who
Yeah.
himself is very flawed. So, and he has insecurities. So it gives me more material and further to create drama and tension. And I think all of this also uh, comes from the fact that even though these characters are marginal, or are seen as marginal, I think only these characters' perspective would be able to tell this story about so-called progressive liberal conference, because because um, because others don't know how empowering it is to look at the rest of the world from a place what they call marginal. So I think that this marginality, what is the language of the more powerful, and I think this, and I'm because of lack of a better word, I'm using it. But to me, Guwahati was central to me. Assam was central to me. Assamese literature was central to me. I was told it is not central, but they couldn't really convince me it is not central. So it's something that is so central to my imagination that gives me such a rich lens to look at the rest of the world. And I don't think people who are not in the center can understand that. And that is why only I can write these stories, nobody else can.
Wonderful way of putting it. Thank you, Aruni. Now to kind of talk about your work as a creative, as a person who teaches creative writing. I mean, how did you kind of uh, decide that yes, I wanted to study creative writing and then finally go teach it?
I really didn't want to do a PhD, and I wanted to teach literature and creative writing. I didn't know that I would teach creative writing, but somebody said that if you go for a creative writing degree, you don't have to give the GRE, and you will never have to do a PhD, because in the international academic market, a creative writing degree is considered equivalent to a PhD, an MFA degree, by the way, not an MA in creative writing. So I didn't want to give the GRE, and I didn't want to do a PhD, because I would be made to do coursework that I didn't want to do. So I went ahead and did an MFA, and luckily, after numerous job applications, I got one job. Then I got this job. So it has worked out well. But I teach creative writing, and I see my role primarily as a very attentive, good reader, and somewhat an editor who would point fingers on a manuscript, but only on the nitty-gritties of the plot, character, not really on the line at a line level. When I have conversations with my students, I ask them questions that push them to make a better draft. But eventually, creative writing, like music, is all about practice. If you don't wake up and write every day, and if you're writing for a deadline because a story is due, you will not have a very satisfying life as a writer. You will have to do the draft, wake up, and do the draft again when you know it is not good enough, and throw it away and do it again when you know it is not good enough. Just the way it takes so long to learn a rag, or a tan. A tan, for example, in Indian classical music, seems so easy to sing, but it comes after hours, years, and years of practice. You don't get to sing tans until I think your third year. So it should look effortless. It should look effortless only when you sit on the stage, only when it is published. But it is
Yeah,
not effortless. You got to work hard. That's what
just
I keep on telling my students all the time, that you have to write and rewrite. You can't write for the deadline of my class. You have to bring your best possible story to my class so that I can give you more feedback and you can take it to the next level and the next level and the next level.
just reminds me, your metaphor of music and writing reminds me of meeting Mitra Fukonn some many years ago, and I think her book Monsoon on monsoon music had just come. So yes, it kinds of
She's a
brings.
singer. Mitra, by the way, is a singer. She's a
Yeah,
Borgit singer.
yeah, 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 yeah.
So she would understand this very well.
Yes, yes, and a wonderful person to talk to.
Yeah, she's lovely.
Yeah. So, to kind of, you were talking about how you worked with your students. So what I would like to know is that how were you taught, creative writing when you were in Minnesota, and basically how different are you now working with your students? I mean,
Well, I think creative writing workshops 10 years ago, when I was in Minnesota, focused on how the draft has failed. I and that has its pros and cons. I didn't find it very useful. Um, I found, when I was an undergraduate, I found the encouragements much more inspiring, and helpful. And however honest and brutally honest they were, and I wanted it, and I sought out. Um, some of the, and depending on, of course, who it comes from, but usually the so-called constructive criticism never really helped me too much unless it came from a very, very well-meaning friend, or a very, very well-meaning person who I deeply respected. It's hard to deeply respect each and every person who teaches you. It doesn't mean I disrespected others, but what I'm trying to say is that when I think about my undergraduate students, I think about myself, and I give them adequate opportunities to fail. I never look for perfection. It would be stupid of me to do so. But I look for what are the ways in which their story has succeeded, and what they need to do in order to make it shine better. So I would give them 5 points, and I know they'll work on four, and the most attentive one will go work on five and ask for a 6 point. So I stick to my 5 points formula, and what is strong about their work, and how can they make it stronger possibly.
thank you so much, Aruni, for an exhilarating session. um, Sanjukta, I think there would be a lot of
Right. Yeah.
questions. Yeah. So
Yeah. We do. Yeah. Thank you, Ankan. Thank you, Aruni, first and foremost, for this really engaging conversation. As of now, we have three questions. The first question is from Shonab Koshik, who says that he has faced a lot of bad luck with freelance writing work. So, would you be able to give him some insights into freelance writing? Some tips, I presume.
Um, I would say never work for free. By free, I mean not money necessarily. Even though it is very hard to not write for money, what I always realize is that we don't live in a world which is friendly to freelance writers or writers who are independent anymore. It is the good luck of a very few writers to be able to live off their writing and royalties. So I would say don't work for free, which means that I never worked for free, and I and which really means that if I was not, if I didn't feel valued, I didn't write for that publication. Um, if a publication is new, has two readers, but the editors treat me with respect and value, I contributed to those, and and even though they didn't pay me money, and that kept me going. And what I want to say is that whatever we write will never go into waste. It is part of our growth, and it is going to be. It is like one brick in your identity as a writer. I really can't comment on a professional freelance life to earn a living because I have never done that. So I don't think I'm the right person to give advice. And also in a volatile economy, it's really, really difficult. So I understand, but I'm sure that um, the mantra is to keep submitting and keep pitching and keep writing. But I'm not the right person to advise on this, except that I do not write for free, and sometimes by that I mean I write for a place that doesn't really pay me, but really values my work, and I'm okay with that.
Thank you so much, Aruni. There's a question from Tanu. No, from Tarini. I'll read out Tarini's question first. Translation study courses usually focus on problem solving and text segmentation. Would you have any advice for young translators to deal with ideological problems encountered while translating a text?
I don't exactly know what kind of ideological problems they're saying, but I wouldn't translate the work of an author who supports who supports people who are racist, homophobic, sexist, or if the writing is problematic, or if the person's views about humanity in general are really messed up, I would usually stop translating. I have done that, by the way. I just won't name them in the middle of projects. I just say that I'm sorry, I've lost inspiration. I don't say tell them the truth because I don't want to fight with them. They're changed, so there's no point trying to change them. They're like 60-year-old people who have formed their views. I don't want to debate with them.
Yeah, what again on this, in this line of thought, I guess if you are deciding to translate somebody, so there is some conviction somewhere. So how can
Yeah,
you somewhere midway decide not to?
yeah,
True.
and in midway, I have discovered that they're terrible people, and I have left those translation projects in between. And I'm being
So
very honest here.
yeah, of course. There's a question from Tanu. Tanu is, you mentioned that there are so many differences in the way the literal and the implied meaning works in languages. Do you think that the work of translation is also a type of transformative writing?
I think that's a beautiful question. I think translation is actually essentially transcreation. And I think if you look at how the translation practices in medieval India, you would see that translation was an act of collaboration and transcreation. You created an entirely new text. I think if you look at the different translations of the Ramayana, we will know this, the characterization of Sita, for example, is different, and it fits the social milieu and the times of the, for example, the Sita in Assamese Ramayana, which is the first Indo-Aryan language to which the Sanskrit Ramayana is translated to. Sita, the mother Kandali Sita is very rebellious. She's very frank. She's very outspoken, and which is not the same with the Sita character in elsewhere. And she's a really interesting character, and a very sometimes often very progressive for her times and very outspoken, and she's not demure, in other depictions that you would see. So I think translation is a beautiful act of transcreation and trans collaboration. I think when we talk about translation or translation theory or practice, we often say, oh, what is lost in translation? I mean, what are you thinking? You're going to translate from one language to another, something is going to be lost and something is going to be gained. So I think that whole question about what is lost in translation is very, very sort of sleep inducing. And I find it very uninspiring, because we often do not talk about what is gained in translation. And I want to bring back Ashapurna Devi once again. I think one of the books that I read as a child was works by Ashapurna Devi, was a Bengali author who was translated by Monu Sen in Assamese. And I read thought that Ashapurna Devi is an Assamese writer because Monu Sen's, I thought these are Bengalis living in Assam, like, or, I mean, I was really young, of course. After reading 100 pages, you get to know that she's talking about Calcutta, or like a village in Calcutta, in West Bengal. But like at first, when you encounter her short stories where locations are not named, and Monu Sen's translations, especially, who is a Bengali a speaker from Assam, they're so brilliant and uses this texture of the Assamese language so beautifully. The magic of the Assamese language is there in Monu Sen's translation of Maitreyi Devi, of Ashapurna Devi's novels, Nohoinati, for example. And I thought that was like so well done. I think that's the beauty of translation, that you completely adapt to a new language and a new text is born, of course, by being as loyal as possible to the original.
Thank you. So there's one question from Grace, and she's speaking about this excerpt that you read out. As a listener, when you were reading out an excerpt, I could visualize the entire scene, and you had to recreate the entire scene again and again. How tough was it for you to express your feelings on paper?
I think I was a medium through which I was expressing the writer's feelings. I think my mother is a brilliant novelist. She wrote it very beautifully. So, and it was, she did the half the work for me. And I wouldn't even translate my mother's work if it was not good enough.
Anupam, also on the same novel, your mother's novel is set in a small town in 1960s India. How is it different from other Assamese Blindungsroman novels? Sorry.
I think it has a lot of similarities actually with other Assamese Bildungsroma novels. For example, Oenanto by Orupa Patangia Kolita. We also have Moramo Deuta, which is young adult Bildungsroman. Um, I think what is interesting is that about Dipti Dutta Das, or my mother's novel, is that it is a feminist Bildungsroman, and also it is autofictional. Ananto, which is one of the most famous Bildungsroman, also in Assamese, also Obhijatri by Nirupama Borgohain is also a very famous Bildungsroman about the women about an activist woman called Chandraprabha Hoikia. And there is also Mereng by Onirata Khara Pujari, which is about the life of Indira Miri, who actually was a very well-known educationist who set up schools in villages of Arunachal Pradesh in the 1950s after getting a degree from University of Edinburgh, uh, and and very pioneering woman educationist. What is interesting about these novels is that they are not autofictional work. They are about other people or real life or historical figures. But Dipti Datta Das's novel is about herself, and I think there are severe risks of writing an autofictional work in a society as patriarchal as India. And she paid a very heavy cost for it, because after the novel was published, her brother never spoke to her ever again, because he thought that the unflattering depiction of one character is her opinion about him, when actually an autofictional novel is also fictional. And we have to remember that. And I think this is something that people who don't know how to read literature, don't know that they don't know.
Yeah, thank you so much. There's a question from Pallavi Narayan. How much of your background as an Assamese writer do you bring out into your classrooms at the University of Georgia?
um I think it's very much prominent. I teach Assamese literature and translation in my classroom, and I say, hey, this is where I come from. This is the writer who's writing about my experiences of growing up in Assam. So I have taught Mamuni Roysam Goswami's work in my classroom when I teach creative writing, which is actually a big departure in the American classroom, because not often, actually all the time, they use American writers or British writers or Canadian writers to teach creative writing. But I do definitely, and I don't think I need to bring out, the way, as I said earlier, I think the way I look at the world is shaped by the experience of growing up in Assam, of reading Assamese literature, of being familiar with Assamese orality. My prose is enriched by bihu songs, folk songs, wedding songs, forest songs, bongit as they say, or bianam, ainam. All of these you will see in my prose. There are chapters and passages in my novel in where actually I have borrowed very strong imagery and motifs and repetition from bihu songs. So somebody who knows Assamese literature intimately, they'll be able to write a annotated edition of it very well. But I just won't tell that to anybody else. I will wait for that person to emerge.
Thank you so much. There is, in fact, one more question from Mr. Shonab Kaushik, and
Mhm.
he is asking about subtitles in movies. The question he's asking is, whenever there is a slang, especially a regional slang or a saying, so how does one translate it into English in terms of, I use a global slang. What are your views on translation of things which are obviously more indigenous?
I tried, my first attempt is to do a literal translation of a slang or a colloquial phrase. And I think that's a very helpful way of doing that. And also it creates an image. For example, um, I think actually I learned this from Derek Walcott, who does a lot of translation of phrases from the colloquial language that he writes about, colloquial language that he writes from, especially in Omeros, his epic poetry, and his epic poem Omeros. He does that a lot. So what he does is he actually translates the phrase directly into English and fits it and blends it within the larger text. And I think that's a really interesting way of doing that. I think Derek Walcott learned it probably from Chinua Achebe, who did the same thing when he translated Igbo proverbs to English. And as we can see, This is something that African writers continually do it, until the new writers like Chimamanda Adichie, Chika Onigwe, and Wile Bulwayo, and a lot of other writers who are widely read across the world now. So I think first attempt should be at direct literal translation of the phrase. It will create a stark image and I don't think we need to say that, I don't really care about saying that this is a phrase or an idiom. I just leave it out there and let it do the magic. We have to trust the fact that images are very suggestive and very rich. For different people, it'll come across as different things. But in the process of dialogue, it'll always say that this is a slang or this is a colloquial. People will be able to understand that.
And sometimes I think writers or translators do risk, over defining or over simplifying, which restricts, the plurality of meanings that could come across from a metaphor or a image.
Yeah, or over annotating, and I think that I think that's not a very productive way. You're making a beautiful text. You're giving a beautiful text so many different kind of pauses that it ruins the beauty of the text. The author didn't intend that. So we should, I think the translation, when it comes to the translation, we must remain as close as we can to the author's intention.
Yeah, I completely agree with you on that. Right. There's also something called transliteration. So where you literally want to translate, which I think is more clinical rather than creative.
Yeah.
So I mean, if you are a reader, you will take the effort to understand, and it comes over a period of time. So texts open up in different ways before us. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So with that, Aruni, we come to the end of the Q&A session, but please, you have to hang on with us for a bit. So today is the last day. So before I come up with the formal vote of thanks, our principal, Professor Swati Pal, is here with us. So if Professor Swati Pal could please speak and also probably ask a question.
Yes. Thank you so much, Sanjukta. Thank you so much, Aruni and Ankan, for a session which has been, in so many different senses, an absolute learning experience for me. This is one session which I feel our students in particular would really have benefited from, and I would really be happy to see the recording of this shared with all our students, because whatever we teach of post-colonial writers, of writers who try to assert their identity, today we've had a person right here with us. And I must tell you, Aruni, that your writing, as also the way you speak, both are so absolutely poignant. Is the net stable? Can you hear me? Can you see?
Yes.
Yeah. So because the net is very unstable on my side today. So I just wanted to tell you that it was a pretty, Ankan used the word exhilarating, enthralling kind of a session. There's so much I learned. I learned about the fact that, writing from you, that writing is a testimony to truth, to history. I learned about the abysmal ignorance that people have, really, and how you counter that ignorance, and the fact that people have internalized so much about the stereotypes that prevail and do nothing to inform themselves, and thus make the most ridiculous assumptions about other cultures, other identities, and so on. I loved the fact that you were so vocal in your stand when you said that I do not translate people whom I find of a certain kind. And I think that's good, because the more you translate, the more that person will be read. And why do we want rubbish to be to percolate to the masses? So that's fantastic. I also loved the way you kind of spoke about your creative writing classes and the fact that you keep wanting the students to reinvent their writing, to reinvent therefore themselves also, I guess, in a in a certain way. So I loved all of it. I mean, there are so many takeaways that I have from this session, and Ankan, so beautifully conducted by you, gave so much of space to Aruni to speak. I enjoyed this session a lot. I had a very small question, and the question arises, and I do want to share with you from this particular poem of yours, which says, "My mother brings the rains." And I was so, it's just that I didn't want to hog this session and I didn't want to assert myself as principal and so on. But honestly speaking, I was so keen that you read this out. It is one of the most beautiful pieces of writing that I have come across. I feel as if I'm in love with your mother. She is, I presume it is your mother that you're talking about. And it is just so beautiful. So I just loved it. So my question comes from there, which is that in all the forms of writing, because you are a person who wears many hats, which genre comes to you the easiest and why? That's my question. That's what I'd like to end with. And apart from that, I must thank you, Shanjukta. I must thank Antara. I must thank Iridescent. I must thank the entire English department for what has been a phenomenal and an outstanding series of in terms of the International Writers Festival. I wish I could stand up and applaud. It's really been great. And I'm so proud that, Janki Devi and the English department in particular, for reasons well known to all of us, has done this. So Aruni, I would love an answer to my question.
Sure.
And if you will indulge me and read out just a few lines, I would be so happy.
I will. It's one of my favorite poems. And yes, it is about my late mother. And I'll tell you about the poem. But, I'm really touched and very grateful, Professor Pal, for those extremely generous comments and very, very inspiring set of comments. So it's going to keep me awake the whole night, I believe. So thank you so much. My heartfelt thank you to you. Um, and you are such a wonderful and generous listener, that and I think that's what really is most important. And I really hope we all can meet in the real life, in a post-COVID world. I got vaccinated, so I'll be able to travel soon, probably. But and I hope all of you remain safe. I will definitely read that. What was the question? Did you ask me a question that I missed?
Yes, I asked you of all, because you wear
Yes,
many hats when it comes to writing. So which genre comes to you the easiest and why?
absolutely. But the novel comes to me much the easiest. But it also means absolute physical labor. I can sit down and write, and I can, if I don't have to cook food, if there are no papers to grade, if there nobody's calling me, I can sit down and write for the whole day, and I'll have 20 pages, and it's very easy for me to write. But if I want to reinterpret your question, which genre comes to you, I would say poetry. For me, a poem always arrives, I write it down, and very often very little editing is done because I write it for months and months in my head. And it's a not a conscious process for me to write poetry. It's always subconscious. I keep on hearing the lines, and then I write down always in one go. So that's, in that sense, that's the easiest genre that comes to me. But I think I'm a novelist at heart, and it's very easy for me to write the long narrative. And I like writing non-narrative. I like reading big fat novels. I love trilogies. Give me a book that is 600 pages long. I will sit with it for the whole day with a lot of pleasure. Thank you for asking the question. So I'm going to read My Mother Brings the Rains. And I'm going to read actually the first paragraph in Assamese first, if possible, because a young man called Kaushik Bishwas, he translated it so beautifully into Assamese, and I think I should honor his work. And I'm so grateful that he translated it. And he didn't actually take my permission. He translated it and sent it to me. And he said, if you like it, and you can you can publish it on your website or somebody else. So he translated it as Mur Aye Borokhun Ane, Onubad Kaushik Bashyas. ভৰি দিয়াৰ পূৰ্বেই শুকান দিল্লীলৈ মোৰ আয়ে বৰষুণ আনে আকাশে চিগাৰেটৰ টুকুৰাৰ নিচিনা ছাইৰঙী সাজ পিন্ধে ছাগলীবোৰে চিঞৰে বতাহে বালিৰ সুৰংগ সাজে আনকি সেউজী পাতিও ডালৰ সৈতে সম্পৰ্ক ছেদ কৰে তেওঁৰ নগৰীত তেওঁৱে আছিল আটাইতকৈ ধুনীয়া তিৰোতা তেওঁৰ খোজে ল'ৰাবোৰৰ থৰ কাচুটি হেৰুৱাইছিল তেওঁ কি খাইছিল ঔফলীয়া চুলিবোৰ যতনাই ছালতনো কি ঘঁহিছিল ছোৱালীবোৰে সুধিছিল ক'বলৈ তেওঁৰ কোনো কথা নাছিল দুখবোৰ ভগাই ল'বলৈ তেওঁৰ হত নগৈছিল I'm going to read the English poem in full right now. If you can give me a moment. Thanks to the internet and the computer, you can just Google everything and it comes up. My mother brings the rains. My mother was not well actually when I wrote this poem. My mother is someone who was an activist, who was a feminist activist, organizer of protest marches. So when I saw her at this really sort of, when she was so sick that she was not able to stand on a hot summer day in Delhi airport, domestic airport, I was really, really, really sad. And it was a very, very hot day. But the moment she landed and she came out, it just started raining. And that's when I wrote this poem on my phone when I was bringing her back in a taxi to my home in Delhi. My mother brings the rains. My mother brings the rains to scorching Delhi even before she lands. The skies where cigarette ash, goats bleat, winds create funnels with the sand, and even green leaves break up with branches. In her city, she was a famous beauty. Men stumbled when she walked. Women asked her what she ate, what she applied on her skin, marveling at her elephant apple rin's silky hair. But she had no secrets to share and refused to tell them her sorrows. Years later, unable to leave the bed for months, on her way to a faraway hospital before the days of cheap long-distance calls, my father bought her a notebook. Write, he said, for yourself, for your son. Otherwise, how will he know? How will he know about your Muslim lover who was beaten up by your brothers for loving you, about the poet who wrote a new poem every night on a different classroom desk until there were none left to pour out his heart? The geek who made you the protagonist of his fiction but didn't write reply poems like me? How will he know about your empty stomachs, the mustard oil you applied on your hair, the bitter juice you drank every morning for that golden skin that men could kill for? Sit up. Write that you slept on beds from where you could count the stars. That rains meant placing tumblers on strategic spots of the house and staying awake with a mop made of old bed sheets. Write about rebellions and oil blockades, about farmers who rushed the streets of Hamdoi to kill landlords. Spend the ink, if not for yourself, for your firstborn, who you worried wouldn't have a sharp nose like his maternal uncles, for you married low, for love, for ideals, for protest marches and poetry. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks.
That was really so beautiful, Aruni. Really, really, really beautiful. Thank you so much for reading, and thank you, Professor Pal, for the suggestion. We are all, I guess, moved. It's a beautiful poem. So now with this, we come to the end of our International Writers Festival. Frankly speaking, I think we have all more or less got into the habit of telling each other that we have to set up the Zoom link, etc. So it's a bad habit, but then nonetheless, we were used to it. So I would like to take this opportunity to thank first and foremost, I would like to thank Professor Swati Pal for her constant support and encouragement. I would like to thank the team Iridescent, the students, Tanu Sharma, Tarani Pandey, Jaya Yadav, and the English Department Association, the students who've come up with this fabulous series of posters. I would like to thank Ruchi Kalita, to Anuj, to Tarun, and last but never the least, to Antara, without whom this would not have been possible. I mean, And of course, the fact that we've had really fabulous and unbelievable set of authors, and the students who've been listening in have only and only been benefited from them. It's been a fantastic series, something that probably it is probably an unexpected benefit of Zoom, that we have been able to get people together. And of course, the writers are not here with us, but then we would like to extend our thanks at the fact that they've come at any time. And Aruni is right here with us. It's past 12. Where he is, and really, really fantastic. Thank you all for being with us, for bearing with us. I hope I've not missed anybody. But anybody would like to speak up is most welcome to do so. Yeah, so that's it. I really wish Antara was here with us. I am missing her so much. She has been here. She's the pillar of support, and it's because of her that this is possible. I couldn't thank her more. And I think I speak on behalf of the entire college, the students who've only benefited from this series. Thank you so much, Antara.
Yes, I will endorse what you said. Please tell Antara that all of us really are grateful to her for her literary vision. She has a vision about how to do these things, and she does it really well. And Aruni, once again, you know, this particular session, what a fitting end, I think, to this whole session of International Writers Week. And, you know, we couldn't have done it better. So thank you so much, Aruni. And there was a question, is this on YouTube? So is this going to be on YouTube, Sanjukta?
Yes, it is, but the link is not available in the public place. What we do is we generate a link, and it is available on the college website. That is going to eventually come. Right, Tanu?
Yes, in fact, some of these links have been uploaded. Once the series is over, then we can unveil them together. So definitely.
So anybody who wants to access them will have to access our website also first.
Yes. Aruni, you were saying something?
Yes, I thought they were asking about the poem. That's why I said it's not on YouTube.
Okay.
Oh, it is now going to be on YouTube via our college website.
Yes, yes.
Thank you so much for this really wonderful session, and I'm really glad that I got to meet all of you, Professor Naskar and Professor Pal and Ankan, who I had no idea was from Guwahati, you know. And so yeah, when he called me to plan the session, it was a really nice surprise, and I was very happy to meet him. So thank you so much, and I really hope we'll meet very soon in a post-COVID new world, and grab tea together.
Yes, yes. Aruni, you have to come to college the next time you are in Delhi.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I would definitely love that. Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
I can leave now, right?
Yes.
Yes.
It's okay. Good night, everyone from Athens, Georgia. Take care.
Good night. Seems really odd to say that, but good night.
Yes. Okay. Bye.
Bye. Bye.